AIDS can occur in the absence of signs of HIV infection. Then, quite obviously, that agent is not the cause, cannot be the cause of that disease, of that syndrome.
Hi, my name is Nicole Zwerin. This documentary that you're about to see is about whether or not HIV causes AIDS. You might think, of course HIV causes AIDS. Are you stupid? Haven't you been alive for the past 20, 30 years? You might think that because that's what everybody thinks, but how can we know something to be true just because everybody thinks that?
Look at what I'm going through and how I'm feeling and the damage that the drugs are doing to my body. And she said, that's the price you pay for having HIV and living, is you're going to suffer and you're going to be ill from the pills. That's the price you pay to live.
Everybody who was diagnosed with these non-specific HIV antibody tests was told to take a very highly toxic drug called AZT.
Growing up, I had two cousins who tested positive around the same time in the late 80s. One took AZT and the other didn't. And the one who didn't is still alive.
Oh.
Yeah, the one who did died around my 10th birthday.
They believe that those pills are keeping them alive, and they defend it to the end, to the death even.
To visit New York and to interview in the late 80s, early 90s, some of the young men who were on the very high doses of AZT, and to see their suffering, that has stayed with me always. And I remember some of them saying they didn't know if they had the will to continue to live because the headaches were so terrible, their nails had gone black, they couldn't eat. It was unendurable what they were suffering.
I've heard people say, you're one of the lucky ones. And I'm lucky that I've never taken, well, I did take the less toxic drugs, but I'm lucky that I never took AZT. I've had doctors tell me that had I taken AZT back in 88, 89 when it was originally prescribed to me, that I'd be dead today. And I know that's a fact.
The entire issue of AIDS started in 1981, so there was no way to diagnose anybody as having HIV, or because there was no such thing as HIV from 1981 to 1983. In 1983, 84 came the belief that, well, we found the virus that causes this.
It could very well be that AIDS is just another name for a group of diseases that have always existed.
It just seems like it's kind of a hodgepodge of different disorders that people have, and then they kind of stick this title on there.
First, we need to define what AIDS is, and that depends on when you were diagnosed and where you were when you were diagnosed.
Prior to the test coming out in 1985, what gave you a diagnosis of AIDS was if you were gay and sick.
The first two diseases that were associated with what we now know as AIDS, which was called the gay-related immune deficiency in the early 1980s, were Kaposi sarcoma, a skin cancer, and PCP pneumonia, which is a type of pneumonia only found in severely immune-suppressed people.
They noticed that everybody who had these infections had low T cells. So they figured that it was something they acquired. That's how the name came in, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. They just hadn't identified what was causing it. They assumed it was a virus, but they hadn't identified it.
Other people at that time noted that those diseases were also associated with a drug that was rampant in the gay community at that time, amyl nitrate poppers, inhalant drugs that are marketed and used almost entirely by gay men. They are immune suppressive and carcinogenic. That could easily have explained the problem, but that theory was pretty much shut down in the mid-1980s when the viral theory came to the forefront.
My brother died of HIV. He was HIV positive.
Do you do poppers?
Yes, I think so. He did poppers.
Do you have Kaposi sarcoma, the skin cancer?
Oh yeah, I had all the spots and all that.
The real Kaposi sarcoma is a dreadful cancer, and there is a good connection, a good correlation between the use of poppers and this Kaposi sarcoma.
Out of the emotional pain of feeling like they were mistakes that never should have been born, many became drug addicted. Along with the sexually transmitted diseases, a lot of antibiotics use. So we had this rolling snowball of factors that came together that were making gay men sick.
It's a temptation for humans to find just one single cause that can be fought, rather than to admit that there are many causes, and we have to change our lifestyle, for example, if we don't want to get sick with some disease.
Back in Colombia in 1965, and about 15 years before AIDS started, I was already studying immune deficiencies and immunological diseases. And I was studying the group of people who were having problems with the immune system. So in 1981, when AIDS started, I was 4 years already studying gay community, the people of Africa. So I knew since the very beginning that AIDS was coming, and that AIDS was a collapse of the immune system due to the things that we humans, due to craziness, are doing to ourselves and to the planet that we live.
The media in 1981 was already telling our community, was already telling the world that it was a virus. There was no evidence for that. And they were already saying that it was sexually transmitted between gay men. There was no evidence for that.
All right, so it wasn't until probably 1985, 6, or somewhere around there that the virus was finally identified. And there was a big whole dramatic thing about that, whether the French identified it first or the NIH identified it first, but they both identified the same virus.
There's no document, there's no series of documents that shows exactly who, when, where, how it was proven that HIV exists, attacks cells, and causes AIDS.
According to orthodox science, HIV is harmful because it kills cells of the immune system and causes AIDS.
HIV stands for Human Immune Deficiency Virus, and it is a virus that attacks humans, like I explained, and it makes our immune system weaker.
According to Professor Duisberg, HIV is harmless. It infects cells, but it is just a passenger virus, doesn't cause any disease.
HIV is, as you sure have heard many times, a retrovirus. Retroviruses I think they are the most harmless parasites we know. That's why they have never been linked to a disease until we have now detection methods to find needles in a haystack.
In Canada, as of 1993, AIDS was defined as about 30 different infections or cancers, usually with the presence of a positive HIV test, but not necessarily.
If you catch certain infections, like pneumocystis, pneumonia, toxoplasmosis, and you're HIV positive, you have AIDS.
In 1993 in the United States, the definition of AIDS was changed beyond the definition in Canada and other industrialized countries by allowing people who were HIV positive and had low immune cell counts, cells called CD4 cells, to be diagnosed with AIDS, not just HIV infection.
So technically, the definition of AIDS is if your T cells are below 200, whether you have an infection or not,
and you were HIV positive, you became an AIDS patient, even though you were perfectly healthy.
Any use of AZT is, in my opinion, criminal, because I think it killed over 300,000 gay men.
Once they lowered the dose to either non-toxic, non-immediately toxic dosages of AZT, or removed AZT from the treatments, the rate of death came down to current levels, which is actually today very low.
I would say, guessing that probably 20% of everybody to 25% of everybody that's on some sort of HIV medicine has AZT as one of its components.
You know, AZT is a carcinogen, and it depletes bone marrow, and it's a cancer agent too. So, you know, there could be an underlying factor there for these people that say they've never done poppers and, you know, they've got KS lesions, you know.
You know, the interesting thing with the argument that is used that the reason people are living longer is because the drugs got better is based on comparing them to the years of AZT. So it's a comparison that's very much like shooting somebody with a bullet and then shooting the next person with a knife and saying, well, the guy who died with the bullet died fast, the guy who died by the knife died very slow. Therefore, a knife death is life-enhancing and life-saving.
So, you know, I think this is the major determinant, the fear to be sued because you have been prescribing drugs that have toxic side effects, but they don't cure the disease for which they were assumed.
What's the leading cause of death for people with AIDS?
A liver and kidneys failure, because all the medications are toxic. I know some people that take 10 pills a day, and that's all toxic to your liver and your kidneys. So people die from kidneys failure.
Is that more often that they die from kidney failure or liver failure than they actually die from HIV?
Right, because the medication is very toxic.
Today, I don't know if HIV exists, doesn't exist, if you can infect or not, if sexual transmission or not. The only thing I know, I am sure today, is that I never will take this medicine again.
I was on the drugs for 6 years, and it's been almost 13 since I've been diagnosed HIV positive.
So you've been off them for 6 years now?
Yeah, so I've stopped taking the drugs for 6 years.
And you have no more side effects?
No, none.
Estoy aquí porque hace 7 años me diagnosticaron positivo, hace 6 no tomo medicamento y estoy aquí porque me interesa seguir promoviendo que la gente no tome medicamento y se quite la etiqueta de VIH positivo.
I don't volunteer, I only answer if they ask. I say don't take the test.
Yes.
If unfortunately you take the test, don't find out what the result is. If you come back positive, I say forget it. If you can't forget it, the tests are so unstable, keep taking it until you get a negative one and then stop. And then use the negative.
There are like 1,000 of reasons for false positives.
Oh my God, if you eat eggs in the morning, that's a false positive.
Yeah.
I think the tests are very, very unreliable because they're testing for antibodies to proteins said to be specific to HIV. But the Perth School in Western Australia say that the proteins that are being tested for are in all of us anyway. There are 67 conditions that can make us test positive, and those are considered false positives. So what is a real positive?
I've had to convince doctors that I'm healthy despite the fact that all my blood work is sitting in front of them proving it, and they're still trying to find something wrong with me.
How many times have you tested?
I've tested fairly regularly, particularly in pregnancy. I've always come up positive.
And you know pregnancy is a reason for
cross reactions and false positives. I have not found one researcher yet that can tell me how to rule out pregnancy as the cause of my positivity.
I was told I would have 5 to 8 years to develop AIDS and die. When I went into the clinic, because they wouldn't tell me anything over the phone, that there was a discrepancy, the nurse or the HIV specialist there, she laid down my immunoblot and told me I had an indeterminate result, that I had to retest for HIV. It caused me to go and research and ask questions. I found that there were some inconsistencies with the CDC website. The CDC has updated this information since then, but at that time it said if I were heterosexual, then my results would be negative and I could resume my life,
But I don't think that now there is any gold standard. There are just 20 commercial test kits around the world, and each one can give you a slightly different result.
Read the fine print. Rapid test insert. Intended for use as a point-of-care test to aid in the diagnosis of infection with HIV-1. A reactive test suggests the presence of antibodies.
What's more, I researched the fact that in England our Public Health Laboratory Service stopped using Western blot as a confirmatory test because it was unreliable, so they decided to do only double ELISAs.
ELISA antibody test insert. At present, there is no recognized standard for establishing the presence and absence of HIV-1 antibody in human blood. Western blot confirmatory test insert. Positive blot results using any specimen type should be followed with additional testing.
Once you get an HIV vaccine, you're going to be HIV antibody positive for the rest of your life. The way of knowing the difference then would be you would have to do something like the HIV PCR to see whether there's active virus. There are some false positives, and they can happen when you're positive with any other virus, which is why the HIV PCR test is not used as a screening test because it has more false positives than the ELISA.
What have I done? I've made documentaries, hopefully like you will be doing for the rest of your days. And you're just turned down as if you're mad.
There are many opinions people can come away with after watching this. Here are some options. A, the drugs cause AIDS. B, HIV alone cannot cause AIDS. C, the people you have seen in this video who have been diagnosed HIV positive will eventually get AIDS and die, especially if they don't take their medicine. Or D, come up with your own answers. Thank you so much. Have a good day. I'm Nicole Zwerin.